Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. We'll be speaking with David Longo in this segment, co-founder and CEO of Ordaos, an AI-driven drug design company, to talk about generative AI and how Ordaos is using AI to design novel and customized mini-proteins that they refer to as miniPRO. Welcome to Health Professional Radio. David Longo, thank you so much for taking the time with us.
Thank you, Neil. My pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what Ordaos is all about.
So I'm Dave Longo. I'm the CEO and founder or co-founder of Ordaos. My background is in computational mathematics. I studied dynamical systems on networks. It's a fancy way of saying rumor spread. That same mathematical technology is what we use to design molecules today. Later in life, I went back to school to Harvard for biotech and Stanford for AI. And I co-founded Ordaos to bring the order of digital bits to the chaos of physical atoms. And Ordaos is using generative AI, so this artificial intelligence technology that you hear about in the news all the time, to design novel mini-protein therapeutics. So these are a new class of therapeutics that have some advantages over monoclonal antibodies, and we're doing that with computers in sort of record time.
Now, I did mention, of course, that Ordaos is an AI-driven drug design company. Briefly tell our listeners what AI is.
Yeah, thank you. So AI in general is supposed to be a clone of human intelligence in a sense, or the word artificial intelligence just means a computer version of human intelligence. Now, there's been a lot of hype around this, but in summary, what it is a combination of tools that can predict and generate data that make our lives easier. So in the case of drug design, you're talking about machinery that can predict binding of molecules. You're talking about machinery that can generate new molecules, that can tell you if there are going to be liabilities in the molecule. And we're using that to do a lot of the testing that we would in vitro or in a dish on the computer.
Mini-proteins, miniPRO. What are mini-proteins and how are they different from larger proteins like monoclonal antibodies?
For monoclonal antibodies, we discovered in nature, right? They're a natural immune response. They're these bulky Y-shaped molecules that are quite large, and they have trouble penetrating into tumor microenvironments, across membranes, and these kinds of things. They have a lot of advantages. Obviously, they work with the immune system. They have great binding, but they're very, very big. And the alternative that everyone knows is small molecule, where small molecules are very small. They can penetrate deep into things. They can get into cells, actually, but they have lots of problems with binding. They're not as efficacious as antibodies and that kind of thing. So where mini-proteins come in is it's kind of the best of both worlds. They're 20 times smaller than monoclonal antibodies, except they have the same power and performance of antibodies because they use the same binding mechanism to get to their target of interest. So what that means is we're able to create these protein molecules, these biologic molecules that have no toxicity aside from perhaps an immunogenic response, but we can prepare for an immune response. They're 20 times smaller, and they're able to do what an antibody can do. So in the antibody field, we see oftentimes there's a drug resistance that comes from these antibodies coming into difficult tumor environments. Like Herceptin or Perjeta occasionally suffer from drug resistance because by the time they penetrate into that HER2-positive breast cancer microenvironment, the tumor elicits an immune response. Now, mini-proteins are able to penetrate more deeply and therefore can avoid that drug resistance problem. On top of that, we're hearing a lot about antibodies in things like Alzheimer's, where they're having to cross the blood-brain barrier. Mini-proteins, their size and their properties, their hydrophobic core and their charged exterior allows them to better cross the membrane like the blood-brain barrier, so they would provide some advantages there as well.
Is Ordaos' goal to make better drugs or to make traditional drugs faster, or is it a combination of the two?
We believe that one of the reasons why drugs are a compromise is the inefficiency and inefficacy of the process. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is that right now the way that protein drugs are discovered, it's randomness. You're making random mutations to a known scaffold, and you're hoping that one assay is set off, and from that, you're optimizing to get to what you need, but you're always starting from this compromise. Ordaos' goal is to make better drugs by reinventing the process, which is by definition faster, because we're shortcutting this serendipity to have intelligent design.
What is it that healthcare providers need to know about AI? There seems to be a lot of fear and trepidation about AI. When it comes to AI being used in drug development, what is the biggest concern that HCPs should be looking at?
I could certainly understand that fear from HCPs. We've had AI systems, expert systems since the 70s, right, that were trying to make diagnoses, and they would get certain classes of sort of obvious diseases correct, but the majority of them, they would miss the subtlety. Where we are at today is that AI is not just an expert system, it's a viewport, it's a magnifying glass, it's a tool that you can use and you can collaborate with. And because of that, it's able to act as sort of a partner in crime to what you're doing. So if you're going through a complex diagnosis, you can use AI to explore ideas, perhaps, explore connections that we certainly know as humans, but it has the ability to maintain all these connections at a larger scale, at a faster clip. So what we're seeing today is not necessarily that the AI is going to replace a diagnosis of an HCP, but it's going to aid that HCP in getting to a diagnosis more quickly. The concern that is realistic, or the correct concern nowadays, is around bias, or the AI's ability to simply memorize answers and repeat them back. Not to mention, it can also hallucinate things. So what we hear in the news today about something like ChatGPT is that it'll make up references. So there was a case where a lawyer put together a brief and it had references to cases that didn't exist, right? That's hallucination. But there are now new technologies, knowledge retrieval and the like, where the AI is making these sort of creative choices, but then it's actually going back and finding the right, the correct, the true references. So we're finding these guardrails to place on AI to make sure that they stay within reality. So you're benefiting from the creativity of AI, but also the rigor of a more traditional sort of semantic system or a typical computer system.
Sum up for us why AI is of great value to drug design and development, and then give us a website where our listeners can learn more.
Of course, AI brings rational design into a whole new era. So this idea that we can rationally design drugs or design drugs by manipulating known quantities over and over and over again, AI is able to do that while factoring in very complex tasks or very complex objectives, like I want it to bind to a specific target. I want it to avoid these off targets. I want it to understand my specific patient cohort and their specific differences to other patients. The AI can do that and factor all of those choices and all of those factors into the molecule that it's designing. So AI is bringing this intelligence and therefore risk mitigation to drug design and development, and what it should do is grossly reduce the time to market and increase the speed to human, to patient, with a higher quality drug that will cure more patients or do less harm to patients as it's curing them. And as far as a website, you can find us at ordaos.bio. That's ORDAOS.bio.
David, I appreciate your time this morning. I'm looking forward to another conversation with you about AI and how it's being used in drug development. Thank you so much for joining us here on Health Professional Radio.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with David Longo. Audio copies of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au, also at Anchor, Spotify, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.